Okay, now that we have that going, I'm going to pass it over to Eric and let him get going with the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So a quick agenda of what we're going to cover tonight. We will look at the project development process. We'll look at some of our existing conditions research, and we will show the alternatives that we've developed. And the main reason we're here tonight is to gather feedback and have an open discussion on the alternatives and the project areas in general. And to, I think, best facilitate that, we've got 3 separate areas, as Jason mentioned. So at the end of each area that we look at, I will open it up for questions. We can go back and look at slides as needed. Finally, we'll wrap up tonight by discussing what comes next. So projects typically follow the process shown here. We start in project definition, which is where we are now. It's where an issue or a problem is identified. It's evaluated. We come up with alternatives to solve the issue. Hopefully at the end of it, you get an alternative that's supported and embraced by the community. Once that happens, the project can become eligible for funding. Once funding is obtained, it can be designed and ultimately constructed. A little bit closer look at the project definition phase, which is where we are now. We sort of do these things as part of it, develop purpose and need, in this case for 3 separate segments. Try to understand the project context. We define alternatives and evaluate them, and that becomes a little bit iterative. And it may lead to changes. All along the way, the stakeholders are involved. And at the end of it, we end up with a final report with recommendations. So a timeline of where we've been so far. We started back in October and November, where we collected existing conditions data, had a local concerns meeting in November where we got some feedback on the project areas from the public, took that feedback and used it to develop some alternatives and begin the draft scoping report. There's been a lot of team meetings in between, and now finally we're here to present the alternatives that we've developed. All right, so there are 3 separate project areas. First one, we just went north to south. So project area 1 is Jericho Road from the school drive up to Valley View. Project area 2 is right in the heart of the village from Volunteers Green up to Jolena Court on Bridge Street. And then finally, we've got Huntington Road from the Cross Vermont Trailhead to the Stone Corral Brewery. So we'll start with 1, a little bit closer look here, just to orient everybody. We've got the schools here, Southview Road Drive, Valley View Road, and Jericho Road right up the middle. And so for this segment, we were looking at pedestrian safety improvements. So we can go through and talk a little bit about the existing conditions. There is some sidewalk that heads down towards the village, but it ends at the school drive. Shoulders are quite narrow. There's steep drop-offs just outside the shoulder in this area. Speed limit is 25 near the school, 35 as you go up the hill away from the school. About 1,100 vehicles per day travel this section of road. It's a right-of-way width of 49.5 feet, and there are aerial utilities on the west side, which is not the side that we're looking at for this project. So as I mentioned, we developed purpose and needs for these segments. So for this segment, the purpose is to connect and expand the pedestrian network to nearby neighborhoods to improve pedestrian mobility and safety along the westerly side of Jericho Road between the Richmond schools and Valley View Road. And the needs are to make a section of roadway that feels safe and comfortable. It's an inviting corridor that achieves the town's goals for pedestrian mobility. It should meet the needs of all age groups, experience levels, and have a safe, user-friendly, year-round pedestrian connection along Jericho Road. So to that, we evaluated 2 build alternatives. The first one is a 5-foot sidewalk separated by a box beam guardrail. We can take a closer look at that. So we'll start by looking at the typical section. This is a little bit hard to envision, but this is the west side of the roadway. So you're looking up the hill. Here's where the existing roadway ends. So there'd be the existing paved shoulder, and then there'd be a box beam guardrail separating the roadway from the sidewalk. And that in plan view looks like this. So we start out connecting to the existing sidewalk here and here. A new crosswalk across the school drive with a pedestrian refuge island. That would be just to make the crosswalk a little bit shorter for pedestrians so they could get at least halfway and have a safe place to stand. We did look at reducing the radius of this curve a little bit, tightening it up just to make it a shorter crossing. This is about as short as it can get while still allowing for the school bus to make the turn. So the green here kind of indicates where the impact limits are. So that would be like the grass strip on the back side of it shown here. And we can and you can see where the guardrail is this sort of dotted black line here. So we can walk up the corridor. Stays basically in the same location. The guardrail breaks where there's either drives or for Southview Drive. Heading up a little bit further, you can see the sort of slope impacts. This is the steeper part of the project area. Stays pretty similar all the way through, and then it ends at Valley View Road. We don't have a dedicated crosswalk here yet, like a marked crosswalk. Due to the vehicle speeds, we don't want to give a pedestrian a false sense of security that it's automatically safe to cross here. So the recommendation would be to put some pedestrian warning signs and then look at some traffic calming alternatives to slow vehicles down through here. And those will be noted in the report at the end. So that's it for alternative 1 for Jericho Road. We can look at alternative 2. This one is a more traditional 5-foot grass strip instead of the box beam guardrail. So that gives not the sort of immovable barrier, but a little bit more space between. And we did look at making this a little bit steeper just to kind of reduce some of the impacts on the backside of the slope. But we can take a look at this one as well. So same basic deal here, connects to the existing sidewalk here and here. Same crosswalk as shown in the first alternative. This one though, we've got the grass strip between the roadway and the path. And as you'll notice, that does push the limits back a little bit more. Same crosswalk across Southview. Again, the steeper part where you can see those limits push down the hill a little bit. Here, and basically ends the same way with just sort of an unmarked crossing to access Valley View Road. So to kind of compare those side by side and really what some of the impacts and costs are, we've got this graphic. So the construction costs for the box beam guardrail alternative is quite a bit more just because box beam guardrail is quite expensive. So it's $510,000 versus $340,000 for the grass strip. When you talk about the total project cost, that's like the design, construction, inspection, and project management during construction. And so these are the comparison of the total cost of the projects to get them implemented. Both meet the purpose and need. They're safe, comfortable pedestrian connections. They can be used by all age groups, and they contribute to the town and regional network. Both are a great improvement over the no build. Sorry, I should mention that we always look at the no build. We always look at the no build as an alternative just because sometimes that ends up being the best alternative. So the no build is basically nothing is done. It just stays the way it is today. So getting back to safety improvements, both have pretty drastic improvements for pedestrians. In terms of right-of-way, there are no permanent impacts with either of them. They both do have some temporary construction impacts, be a little bit more with the 5-foot grass strip versus the box beam guardrail. We are not anticipating any cultural or environmental resource impacts. Winter maintenance is a good one to talk about as well. Typically, you'd want 5 feet of grass strip to have a good snow storage space for a snowbank. In the case of the box beam guardrail, we don't have that, so there'd be some coordination needed. As that snowbank gets bigger, it'll want to push over and into the sidewalk, so it's a matter of timing the sidewalk plow and the roadway plows. In contrast, the 5-foot grass strip does have the storage space, but because of those steep sections, it's going to tend to want to let, especially at this time of year, it's going to want to let the snow melt onto the sidewalk where it could freeze overnight. So that's another winter maintenance issue to consider. We're not anticipating any impacts to utilities or to drainage, and both projects are below the half-acre threshold, so they don't require stormwater treatment or permitting. So that's it. I guess I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments at this point. I've put a few things on the sheet just to kind of help guide, but we can really talk about anything related to this project area and those alternatives.
Eric, I'm just noting a question in the chat about a box beam. If we have a picture of that, or
I can look for it while if there's more questions coming in, I can come up with a picture. Yes.
Okay.
I guess to add to that, I think as we probably internally discussed, like in Shelburne, there is the section of Webster Road, that extension in between Shelburne Village, Route 7 and Webster Road. So that's like an example of a box beam. So even if you don't have a picture immediately right now, if you're ever driving down Route 7 this weekend, you can keep on the lookout, and on the right side going south, that you can see that box beam at Webster Road.
Let's see, John, I think you had your hand raised first. You're muted, right?
There we go.
There you go.
So Revy, I don't get out much, so I don't know when I'll next be on Route 7. So I was the one who asked about what does a box beam guardrail look like, and I guess could I maybe between that and just a little more of a description of the difference between what like the alternative 2 is? Does that just mean there will be the road will end and then there'll be 5 feet of grass and then a sidewalk?
Yes, that's right, for alternative 2. And this is the box beam guardrail. Here it's a little bit different than the standard guardrail you see. It is quite common. It has a little bit less of a profile, so it takes up less space. And for pedestrian applications, you can actually mount the rail sort of right on top of the post, so they're not sticking out one side or the other. But it basically looks like this. It would be galvanized like this, and it's just much smaller profile than standard highway guardrail. A little bit more aesthetically pleasing as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Adam, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, so the alternative with the box beam is the box beam on between the road and the sidewalk, or between the, okay. And
yeah,
then,
that's right.
Okay, and so then in both scenarios, it sounds like, so my property is the one that goes kind of where the sidewalk will be, and it's quite steep. There's the wire fencing that's there now between Southview and Valley View. And so would this be basically like removing that and then filling in on that steep section, so the sidewalk would, like the sidewalk's not going to take over any of the existing road, right? It's all going to be adding to the shoulder. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and you can see the property, well, the approximate right-of-way line. So there are some areas where those temporary impacts push past it, and that's just basically regrading of the existing slope that's there today. It's kind of hard to tell without a detailed ground survey, but it could impact a tree here or there, just depending on how much fill and the proximity to the tree trunk.
Well, I'm all for the sidewalks and use the land, but okay. And then is the advantage of the box beam versus the grass is mostly just a safety thing as far as barrier between the road and the pedestrian. Is that the advantage?
That's one of the advantage. It is sort of a hard barrier. It also will decrease the impacts beyond right of way a little bit, though they are just temporary. Like I mentioned, just slope regrading. That 5-foot grass strip is considered adequate safety. So they both are considered safe for pedestrians.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Linda, I can tell you, living on the street, people all ages use this all year round, every day, walking up and down Jericho Road down to the village, just from what I see day to day.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess a good segue, Linda, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think maybe Adam just answered it. I was wondering how many people really walk from the village up to Valley View. And I'm concerned about the speed that people drive their cars down through there and why it was picked to go to Valley View.
I can answer, I think, the first part of that in terms of the actual like number of people. We don't have actual numbers that we're going by this, and the location itself. This was a request, part of a request from the town to look at this this location, and I think as a project team we decided to stop where we did. Just by looking at the surrounding area and just a logical end point, and that seemed like the best location to do it. Eric, Revi, I don't know if you had anything to add there.
No, I think in terms of the project scope, I think it was just decided that at least 2 neighborhoods would be covered with a safe route to the schools. At least that's what the discussions were when we chose this segment and to the extent of the scope. I just wanted to draw your attention because there's a question in the room too.
Hey, if I could jump in here, this is John. As a member of the Transportation Committee, I'll add that when the Transportation Committee first got started and was asking for public input, we heard from a number of people about the need for safer routes to school, better sidewalks, and including in this area. And we also heard from the select board as we were putting our sort of work plan together. In particular, one select board member, but all of them supported the idea of getting, you know, better connections to the schools. The reason to say stop at Valley View rather than continue to go forward was just because we thought this piece would be more manageable.
Will
Linda,
the
if you
highway
want-
crew have to keep it plowed all winter?
Only when it snows.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Revi, did you have a question? I see your hand is
Yeah.
up.
You can just go up to the microphone. Yep.
Hi, I live on Valley View. I think there's another couple of us here. And I have to say, this brings tears to my eyes. I thought this would never happen in my lifetime, that we would even have a picture of a possible sidewalk. So I'm grateful to the Transportation Committee and the Select Board for, you know, encouraging the scoping of this. I can say from my own family that it was just super sad that the kids really couldn't safely walk to school. And we would have walked to school, whether we would walk to the village all the time, I don't know, but the kids would have walked to school every day. When they were at the school age, it's less, you know, it's not even a mile down there from where we live, but it was, you know, we would walk down on the first day of school and we called it our annual, like, you know, death march to school, because you'd, especially on that day, so much traffic, a very like, you know, sketchy shoulder. it just wasn't a workable thing. So I think having that little, it's not that much, to go from Valley View to school, but it's going to mean that 20 families on that road, plus all the Southview people, have the option. So I'm very, very much in favor of this. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask as a safety question, because you're sort of on the edge there. So if it is slippery in the winter, is there something that keeps you from going over the edge?
A fence could be placed on the backside of that sidewalk where it's especially steep. That's quite common when you've got a both steep and sort of high drop off on the edge. So it could be anything from a chain link fence to something more ornamental.
And does that add to the cost? Does that have to be built in?
It will, not depending on how many areas we're talking about, not necessarily a huge amount, especially if it's chain link, but yeah, that would have to be something considered. We did put some, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's important to consider, because if you're talking about kids walking and especially biking to school, it'd be a little scary to send them off and have them fly over the edge.
Absolutely. And we do, at this level of estimating, because we just don't have the detailed information we need, we do put some contingency in there. And I suspect that the cost of a chain link fence could be pretty well caught in that contingency. And we'll further refine the cost as we go too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I jump in with another question here?
Go for it, Adam.
So do you mind actually shifting the view of this map further up Jericho Road towards Valley View? So just before Valley View, there's an access to a part of the property there. If the box, so there's the driveway that you're over there, and then further
Yep.
up closer to Valley View, there's an access into an upper part of that lot.
Okay.
If the fence option was chosen, would that remain a gap?
It could, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just basically, quote unquote, designing this off of an ortho photo with a little bit of surface information. So yeah, I mean, if there's a drive access there, that could be left open.
Okay. And then I'll just add to the earlier sentiment that this is an amazing thing to be seeing happening. It's something we've been hoping for, being on this road all along since we moved here. Just to put a little color to the usage of it, we're so close to the school, it'd probably be, we're a 5-minute walk to school, but to take the bus is a 45-minute to an hour long, just because it goes around the other way. So this would be huge for all the families in Valley View and Southview and on Jericho Road. It certainly would alleviate some of the traffic woes of everyone driving into the school. So thank you. I'm super psyched to see this.
If I may ask for the residents on, Valley View or in the area who would see themselves using this, or their children using this to walk to school, do you have a preference on either of the two alternatives, either the box beam or the grass strip? And June, it looks like you raised your hand right away. Adam, I'm taking your hand is just still raised from previous. Okay, go ahead, June.
Thank you. I actually walked from Southview to the village today, and so this is music to my ears because it's just not safe. And my kids always wanted to walk or ride their bikes to school, and I said, absolutely not. So I'm loving this idea. My preference would be not to do the box rail and do the 5-foot strip, only because it's consistent with the sidewalk on the other end of the school. And so it would be, you'd be looking sort of at the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, it just would be consistent.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, where you mentioned the snow being and the maintenance sort of being a main differentiator, I guess I would defer to the people who are going to have to maintain it and what they're going to prefer one way or the other. I guess I'm a little surprised, just knowing how steep that is, that the amount of fill that would be required to do the grass strip is cheaper than the box beam, but great.
So a couple of things to note here. We're using LiDAR, which is not the same as ground survey, so it's likely that those limits would change quite a bit. But it was, you know, in part because of the way we set up this typical section. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the box beam option. How we set up this typical section to be, you know, on the steep side between the roadway and the sidewalk. And if you can see, the existing ground kind of does this. So we're cutting into some of that here in order to tie back here, rather than, you know, sitting up high on the road and then having to chase it way down the hill. But again, this is LiDAR, so it's not as accurate as a ground survey. It's, you know, sort of the best we have available at scoping.
I guess one more thing to note, I think somebody mentioned I think it was you, June, who just mentioned it'd be similar to the sidewalk that's already existing. The only difference being there wouldn't be a curb. And I think that does exist today in the southern section.
Yes, it does.
All right, I think we've exhausted this one and we're ready to move on to the next.
Okay. So our second segment is Bridge Street, right through the heart of the village. It would go from the Volunteers Green up to Jolena Court, where it would tie into, so this segment was studied last year. So this sort of feeds into what happens there, where the sidewalk continues up along the west side. But we are looking at the east side. We're looking at the east side of Bridge Street, and we're again focusing on pedestrian safety for this segment. So there is existing sidewalk along the west, and we just found out recently that's going to be improved, I believe this summer, with a grass strip and some new curb, along with some stormwater drainage improvements. So other pieces of the existing conditions are that it's fairly flat through there. Got quite a bit of destinations that would make it an attractive area to walk. Speed limit is 25, 5,700 vehicles per day travel through there. Same 3-rod right-of-way, or 49.5 feet. And there are utility poles along the other side of the road, the west side, which we're not looking at for this study. So the purpose for this one is to build upon the efforts of the Bridge Street Complete Streets Corridor study by improving pedestrian mobility and safety along the eastern side of Bridge Street between Jolena Court and Volunteers Green. And this, the needs are to provide an inviting corridor, meet the needs of all age groups and experience levels, contribute to the town's network, and completing a safe, comfortable, user-friendly pedestrian connection along Bridge Street. So for that, to meet those needs, we looked at 2 alternatives, and the first one is a 5-foot grass strip. And so for this typical, the town is planning to install curb this summer separate from this project. So we're showing it there as kind of already existing when the sidewalk comes through. But it would be a standard 5-foot grass strip, 5-foot sidewalk, and then it would tie back down into existing on the backside. And starting at the southern end, it would cross to connect to the existing sidewalk along the western side. We decided to stop north of Esplanade just to avoid crossing this wide driveway, and also to eliminate some of the costs, get some of that length of concrete down a little bit. So there'd be a crosswalk here, and then you can sort of get an idea of the limits of impact by this little bit darker green line here. Go past the town offices. These trees here are likely going to be impacted. Some of them would probably need to be removed with this alternative. Continues past the driveway. These 2 Accessible the accessible parking spaces would be moved forward by a couple of feet, but they'd be maintained. And we continue past the library, past the cemetery, where we'd be very careful to reduce or minimize impacts as much as possible. And then finally end at Jolena Court, where it will tie into the future improvements along the east side heading up the hill from here. So alternative 2 is quite similar. It just has a 2-foot grass strip instead of a 5-foot grass strip. And the reason we looked at this is just to minimize some of those impacts on the backside of the path. So pretty similar typical section, it's just less of a grass strip. And that would match what is going to be on the west side of Bridge Street in this area and what is currently on the west side of Bridge Street through here. That's a 2-foot grass strip today. So as you can see, the impacts stay much closer to right of way. These trees, some of them may be able to be saved with that extra 3 feet, or I should say the reduction of 3 feet of that grass strip. It still need to be looked at more closely after ground survey comes in. But otherwise, the 2 alternatives are similar except for that grass strip. And it, of course, keeps it a little bit further away from the cemetery as well. And to sort of stack those ones up side by side, the construction costs are essentially identical. It's, you know, the cost of the concrete and the excavation that really dictates the cost of these ones. So this is a relatively inexpensive, it's not a very long length of sidewalk. So $220,000 total costs. They both meet the purpose and need. They both improve safety for pedestrians along that east side of the roadway. Neither of them have any permanent impacts outside of right-of-way, but there are, of course, more impacts with the 5-foot grass strip, more temporary impacts. In terms of environmental, there are those trees that I mentioned. I think it's quite likely that they'll need to be removed with a 5-foot grass strip and still possible with the 2-foot grass strip. For cultural resources, we just need to be careful during design and construction near the cemetery. For winter maintenance, sort of what we discussed for Jericho Road, there is adequate snow storage for a 5-foot grass strip. There is not for a 2-foot. So what happens is the snowbank kind of gets pushed back and forth between the sidewalk and the roadway. So it just means that that snow removal process needs to be coordinated between the 2 pieces of equipment. Not anticipating any utility or drainage impacts. And similar to Jericho Road, there is less than half an acre of new impervious surface, so there's no need for stormwater treatment or permitting. So back to the open forum portion of it, and I'm happy to go back to any of those slides that people want to see.
I see Linda has her hand up already.
Yes, I do. I think that perhaps that your group ought to talk to the people that were in my office the other day.
Linda, it looks like you muted.
There we go.
Okay, we heard, I think we should, the people in your office the other day, I think that's when it cut out.
Okay, there was a group of people in there and they were trying to consider whether those trees, if they're diseased, if they're ready to come down, because I'd hate to see those people do some work saying, oh, we're gonna replace this tree, and then we come along with a sidewalk. And the other thing, on behalf of the cemetery commissioners, there is a concern that there are telephone cables under the ground right in front of the cemetery. And we aren't completely sure how far down there are any caskets. When there was digging going on for Jolena Court, a casket was discovered that they didn't think was there. honestly, they just covered it back up. But we were wondering, how are you going to figure out if there's bodies down there?
Yeah, so there's provisions you can put in the contract that require like an archaeologist to be present when the work is happening there. There are procedures that can be added to any construction documents that'll sort of dictate that, you know, the contractor can't just go in there with an excavator and start digging. There'd have to be an archaeologist involved. And we have done work near cemeteries in the past, and you just sort of include those provisions in the contract to make sure it's done properly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's a great heads up. Kathleen, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Just want to point out, people are adding to the chat area or the chat box. And just hope, I'm sure people are all aware that there is no sidewalk to the north on the east side as well. So the whole area between Route 2 and as far as Esplanade Street, that we are really going to be looking at this whole area, but this particular project is just looking from Jelena Court down to Esplanade. And just a couple other things I did, because I had sent out on Front Porch Forum an announcement of this meeting. A couple people responded to me, and I wanted to provide their comments. Someone named Sass Blair, who lives on Depot Street, and he said, Sass said that I'd like to have about 48 inches of grass between the sidewalk and the road, and then made some other comments about not particularly related to this project, but please put up a street light on the other end of the bridge, and please put up a dead end sign on Depot Street. So we'll pass those along to Pete Goslin. And then Andy Solomon said that really wonderful to hear about new and more sidewalks, and really encouraging planners and us to be thinking about sidewalks and bike paths in some locations. So, and also suggested that maybe a path between the village and the new town forest might be a good idea. So I did want to pass those along. And I guess I had one question for Linda, and that is, who were the people who were in the town office talking about the trees, so we could get in touch with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Linda, I don't know if you have a immediate response to that you wanted to chime in.
There's Pete Goslin and Connie Bona and Mary Houle. I believe that Mary Houle donated and planted those maples that are there right now.
Great, thank you. And Kathleen definitely noted the comments in the chat. They seemed like more on the support side of things. So if I missed a question that you think we should address, let me know. John, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to add a little more context for folks on this discussion, in that the question of, or the issue of improving sidewalks on Bridge Street has been around for a while in Richmond. The town did a study back in 2010. One of the, and there was probably some before that, but that's the earliest one I know where the need for a sidewalk on this side of the road was identified. So it's been thought of for a while. It's been on the transportation committee's list of things we were told to look at, and certainly looking ahead as more development happens in the creamery lot, there's going to be even more use in this area. So this is one of the reasons that this part of this three-piece project is coming to you now, maybe ahead of some others.
Okay, great. I think, unless anyone had any additional questions on this section. Going once. All right, I think we'll move on to the next one.
Jason, I do have one question, and that's, does the chat get saved as part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll save a record of it.
Okay.
Yep. And oh, actually, you just reminded me, Kathleen, those comments that you read aloud, do you have those like via email? Can you share them with one of us so we can have them for the record?
I do. I'll be happy to send those to you. Thanks,
Great.
Jason.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to project area 3, we looked at Huntington Road between the Cross Vermont Trailhead and Stone Corral Brewery, which would tie into the existing sidewalk that ends right about here and carries back up into the village. And so for this one, as opposed to the other two, we were looking at improvements for both pedestrians and cyclists, given the number of cyclists that ride along this road. So in terms of existing conditions, we've got that existing sidewalk, which you can just see here, ends right at the Stone Corral Brewery. Narrow shoulders, very steep drop off, not as high as along Jericho Road, but just as steep. Pretty hilly and curvy topology for the road. Destinations include the brewery and the trailhead. Speed limit is 35, about 3,400 vehicles a day travel through here. Same 3-rod right-of-way as the other 2 roads. And there are aerial utilities along the northern side, which is the side we are looking at. So the purpose of this project is to improve cyclist and pedestrian mobility and safety along the northerly side of Huntington Road between Stone Corral Brewery and Johnny Brook Road. So the needs are to create a safe travel corridor, meet the needs of all age groups, experience levels, and trip purposes, and contribute to completing a gap between those destinations mentioned. So we actually looked at 3 alternatives for this one besides the no build. And the first one is a 10-foot wide shared use path with a 5-foot grass strip. And so the typical section is kind of similar to what we saw on Jericho Road. The grass strip doesn't need to be quite as steep, but it would be a 5-foot grass strip. And then in this case, it would be a 10-foot shared use path. And instead of concrete, they're typically made out of asphalt. Then it would tie down with some stone fill to minimize the impacts, because this is all flood hazard area through here, which means the need for additional permitting and analysis during design. So in order to keep that as minimal as possible, we are proposing some stone fill to let that slope be nice and steep. So starting at Johnny Brook Road, it sort of follows, it follows with that 5-foot grass strip consistently all the way through. You can see that with the right-of-way line, this one does have permanent impacts because part of the path is beyond the right-of-way line. Get pretty close to the residents here. Continuing along is where we come into the utility poles. These are all displaced by this path, so these would have to be relocated. And a little bit more impacts into the flood hazard area. I've got a pretty wide drive here. We'd want to consider some access management, not doing anything to the drive itself, but maybe just narrowing some of the openings. And then finally, narrowing back down to connect to that existing sidewalk at Stone Corral Brewery. So alternative 2 is pretty similar, except we decided to look at a way to potentially avoid some of the impacts to the front yard of the farmhouse. So with this one, we take a off alignment or cross country route beginning about here. It's the same typical section. And then it goes out behind the house, avoiding this tree and coming back. And then carries on the same way as what we just looked at with alternative 1. Now, due to the impacts of both the flood hazard area and right-of-way impacts, we decided to look at a third alternative, which is to simply add wider shoulders to the roadway. And so that would be a widening of, it's a variable shoulder width today, but it would be a widening of approximately 3 feet on both sides. And then you would delineate with, pavement markings, that 5-foot wide shoulder, which would be a great improvement for cyclists. Somewhat of an improvement for pedestrians, though not as inviting as a path, especially for younger and less experienced users. So we just have one sheet here to show what that looks like. It just stays a consistent 5-foot shoulders on both sides all the way through the project area. So comparing these 3 alternatives to the no build, the path options are fairly similar in cost, about $400,000 to build with the 5-foot grass strip alongside the road. A little bit less expensive because there's less stone fill associated with going behind the farmhouse. And then the shoulder widening is about $250,000. So the 2 path alternatives do meet the purpose and need. The widened shoulders do not. Again, it would be a great facility for moderately to experienced cyclists, not so much for young kids or inexperienced users. Pedestrians, again, it would be not as comfortable as a path by any stretch. In terms of safety, you've got great improvements for the 2 path alternatives. You do get some improvement with the shoulders compared to what's there today, just obviously not as much as with the path options. For right-of-way impacts, there are both temporary and permanent on both path alternatives and none associated with the shoulder widening. Both the path alternatives have impacts to the flood hazard area, which is not the case with the widened shoulders. For cultural resources, they both impact that farmhouse and that property just in different ways. One impacts the front yard, and then the other one requires it to go off alignment and through the field. Both do have that adequate 5 feet of snow storage. It's not really applicable with the shoulder widening. Both of the path options do require relocation of the utility poles, and that would not be the case with the shoulder widening. As opposed to the other 2 segments, these are bigger than an acre of new impervious, so they would require stormwater treatment and permitting. Again, not associated with the shoulder widening. Okay, that is it for those 2 or 3 alternatives, and I'd like to open it up for discussion once again.
Okay, thoughts, reactions, preferences? You like them all? Daniel?
Hey, everyone. Great. I just want to say thank you to everyone for putting this together. It's really phenomenal to see these potential connections between the downtown and the Johnny Brook Trail. I'm a frequent walker and runner between the village and Johnny Brook Road and the Cross Vermont Trail. And so I would absolutely love to see an off-road trail, shared use trail put in there. I think that would be amazing and would invite a lot of pedestrians to explore the Cross Vermont Trail, which is a great resource for Richmond. It does seem like it's a level of complication beyond just widening the shoulder. And so I would encourage if that does become the most feasible option, to think about what alternatives to traffic that we could do to also increase safety if it was just a wider shoulder. So decreasing the speed limit, putting in things to kind of reduce the flow of traffic. I always run on the shoulder and cars go quite fast, especially around the S turns, and it feels unsafe for a large group of users. But there might be alternatives if you all did go with the shoulder design to slowing down traffic and raising awareness about pedestrian access there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I would chime in. I don't know if the Richmond Mountain Trails has talked to this portion at all, but this might alleviate some of the parking issues with access to the Chamberlain Hill area. So I know there's very little parking sort of on the other side of Johnny Brick Road. So being able to park, you know, at the park or the Round Church or something like that, if that's allowed this season or not. But being able to park downtown and then ride safely into that network would be a huge win for that network also. I guess the only question I would have is, like, what is the actual feasibility of being able to accomplish something that requires like so much change to easements and impact on existing private property? I mean, does this add to the challenges that would just outside of just cost and building? And the first two just almost seem just so vastly more complicated than just widening the shoulders. Like, what would be the real feasibility of even doing those first two things?
Do you want me to take that one, Jason?
I was hoping you would actually.
Okay, yeah. No, I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, it does certainly complicate projects. The best ones are where you can keep everything within right of way, and those sail through very quickly. That said, we deal with right of way impacts all the time with our projects. So yes, it complicates things. It will add time to developing and designing the project, but that's not to say that it can't happen. It's certainly not a deal breaker. The floodplain as well is another complicating issue. However, we've dealt with that on past projects. It's just another level of design and permitting that has to be looked at during the design phase of those improvements. So yes, more complicated. No, not deal breakers, and not typically a reason to not pursue a project.
Yeah, I would just add, and thanks, Eric, for taking the lead on it. Appreciate it. I would just add that, you know, if you look at the price tags and you feel like you're comfortable with that, and ultimately you're not fully satisfied with just wider shoulders on the road, then I think you'd probably want to, you know, keep trying for the path option to figure out how you can make that happen. But if you think the wider shoulders are gonna be enough to satisfy, you know, the general public of the area, then I would go with that, because that's definitely a, you know, less complicated and would probably get done sooner, time-wise. Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yeah, my name is Lisa Corey. I live on Cochran Road, so you know, close to the Round Church. I walk all the time around the village, and I once tried to I wanted to see what that Johnny Brook Trail was like, because it's on the Cross Vermont Trail, and I walked down to go on it. It was such a very uncomfortable and scary experience. I've never gone back there. That was like a few years ago. So I agree about the widening the shoulders. I still don't think I would go there. The way cars drive on those curves, they often don't slow down there, and then those curves, they end up, you know, going out a little bit. So so yeah, I would like one of those off-road paths. I would definitely be using it a lot if I had that.
Right, but you would not feel comfortable with just a widened shoulder. Did I?
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. Yep. Thank you. I appreciate that. Alan, you're on.
Okay. Is it possible to have a hybrid where there is room to have the multi-use path, and then when the room is constricted, such as in front of the farmhouse, to have a box beam rail along the road surface so that you could fit a 5-foot sidewalk size passageway through that narrows, basically have a trail that narrows, and that if that could stay within the right of way so that we were not infringing on private property. Is that possible?
I think a 5-foot sidewalk could fit with a box beam guardrail separating it from the roadway. That wouldn't meet the full purpose and need of this segment, but it could be kept within right of way. If we're considering the cyclists as well, then the 3 alternatives we're looking at do a little more to address the total purpose and need. But yes, I mean, if it was for just pedestrians, then I think absolutely a 5-foot path separated by a guardrail could fit within right of way. And with less impacts into the flood hazard area as well.
Okay, any other lingering thoughts, comments, preferences?
It's on mute.
Fars?
Yes, please.
I just, obviously, we live in the farmhouse that is on the corner. It appears like it'll be 2 out of the 3 scenarios impacting us fairly substantially. We certainly aren't opposed to having pedestrian traffic be safer. Alan certainly made a great comment in my mind that I would say some give and take. Seems like it might make sense in this scenario. Shrinking down just to consume less space when it goes in front of the house. I don't see the behind the house trail happening, but I could be wrong. And I guess I just have some overall concerns with filling floodplain, moving poles and whatnot. It seems like a fair bit to happen. And possibly, we have a drainage ditch that runs along the eastern portion of that. Certainly keeping in mind that that would be taken care of, I assume. And also just kind of wondering what the general policy is of reaching out around the right of way. And I guess to be quite frank, how are we compensated? We're the ones that are here 365 days a year with everybody going by. We understand all the traffic concerns. We don't have outdoor pets because traffic is early, but so certainly we're not opposed to making this a safer commute, but would like.
No, did we lose them?
Well, I guess I can respond to part of that. So it's in the recording, but any impacts outside of right of way, those do get compensated. It's all part of the Uniform Act. So there's formulas that the state uses to determine the values, and it's a pretty simple formula, but it does compensate any property that moves either as a permanent or a temporary easement to either cover construction or cover maintenance after the path is built.
Yeah, I didn't quite make out there. It's a comment about going behind the house, but I couldn't quite, I wanted to ask them to repeat it, but
It sounded, it sounded like he was opposed to that, and I guess I would add that in a situation like this, I don't see how we would design a path like that without the approval of the property owner. So if that's something that's just not desirable for them, then that's a alternative that probably wouldn't be pushed forward.
There was somebody who just joined us via
Maybe it's them coming
phone.
back in.
I think it might be them, yeah. To the iPhone that just joined us, is that the FARs that we lost?
It
There you
is.
are.
Sorry about that.
No, no worries. We were just bummed that we lost you.
So yeah, obviously we have some concerns. There's some significant impact in front of the house, and but we're certainly open to ideas. And in one of the photos, there was a blue line that was hashed out quite a ways out in the field. Could you guys fill me in on what that was marking or delineating?
That is a property line that comes from parcel mapping. They are not known to be super accurate, but that's supposed to depict a property line or a parcel line. That's not anything to do with the project.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Yep. And so it sounded like you are not in favor of the alignment that takes the path through the field. Is that correct?
That is definitely correct.
Okay.
There's several issues there. One, not that we use the field access road every day by any means, but we have a lot of trailer trucks that leave when we're harvesting feed, and that is a spot that having to cross a sidewalk, pull ahead 75 feet or whatever that may be, and then pull out, that's not an excellent option by any means. I can see some issues with that.
That's good to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's also a spot that floods. Even just the Halloween storm 2 or 3 years ago, that the water would have covered the whole path there. And I would imagine that would be an issue as
Yeah,
well.
it was something that we had talked about, and just, I guess, to give you some background as to how that alternative came to be, we were, looking at this and seeing how close it was going to come to the front of your house, and we trying to put ourselves in your shoes, and thinking, well, maybe we should at least try to do something behind the house so it's further away from the house and doesn't, eat up so much of the front yard. So that's just the background on how that alternative came to be on paper, and it's really great that you were able to attend tonight and give us your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not opposed to ideas, and obviously I think our situation is different than anybody else's here, but we're certainly all for something that can make it safer for everybody.
If if you're thinking about this and marinating on it after the meeting and have an idea that pops into your head, please do reach out to us. And I think Eric, you also had an answer about compensation, but I don't think they were on the call at that time. So I don't know if you want to just repeat that.
Sure. Yeah, you had asked about compensation, and any impacts to private property outside of the right of way are fully eligible for compensation, and the state has formulas, and it's based on percentage of impact and fair market values, and absolutely that those impacts can be compensated either in the form of dollars or landscaping improvements. There's a number of ways.
Yep.
Any other thoughts from the two of you before I go over to Kathleen? And Kathleen, I see you. I got you.
The only other thing I would add is my only concern is with a sidewalk is that bicycles might not use it.
Mhm.
I believe bikes are not supposed to be on sidewalks. And there is a lot of bikers that come through here, and it feels like trying to accommodate that would be a good thing.
I guess while I have you, I guess, this is similar to, I think, what Alan brought up. If the path were to come as close as it can to the roadway by your house, and narrow, I think, I don't know, we could probably go as narrow as what, Eric, maybe 8 feet, and still
8
feel
feet,
like we
yeah.
could be a real path that could accommodate both bicyclists and pedestrians. I don't know if that's something that's workable for you, or if that's
Well, I
still
think-
not great.
To me, at this point, it's obviously in the early stages, and keeping an open mind is going to be in the best interest of all of us.
Definitely. Okay. Kathleen.
So actually, I was going to ask about that very topic. I thought Alan's suggestion really makes sense, and it could well add a lot of safety for both pedestrians and bicyclists. If you did have some kind of a box beam rail or some way to have the trail still be in front of the house, but narrow it or add a box beam or whatever to accommodate both pedestrians and bicycles, because I think having the bicycles off of the road is really helpful. Of course, it is imperative for pedestrians, but bicycles also.
If I could just add another thing to that, I couldn't agree more that, if we can, on the corner, get the bikes off the road. But that's going to be a 2-part scenario, offering a trail or a sidewalk or path or whatever it may be. And then having the cyclists use it is a whole nother challenge. And I'm not sure how to best address that, but it seems like if the effort is put in to do that, I'm sure some cyclists will use it, but there seems to be a need for speed with the cyclists coming down off the hill. And I guess, I question how much the bicycles will use that paths in general. That's just my 2 cents.
No, that's a good comment. There is a percentage of cyclists. It's pretty small percentage, but there is a percentage that will basically just never use a path. They are out there, and it's probably a higher percentage out in this area because those are sort of the bold and fearless cyclists that want to be in traffic and want to take these roads that don't have those pedestrian or bike and pedestrian paths. So yes, some will not use this, no matter how inviting you make it. But as a percentage of overall cyclists, it's very small. It's like 3 or 5%. This would be something very appealing for a less experienced user or family with kids. It's a facility for a different type of user.
Alan, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So since the FARs are on the call, I really want to bring this up. This has never been my idea, but it has been floated by others. What about the possibility of just moving the farmhouse across the road? Has anyone talked to you about that? And what would your reaction be?
Nobody, to my knowledge, has ever brought it up to me. Obviously, Aaron and I have only lived here 7 years. My grandmother lived here, 60 years prior to that. Can't say that somebody hasn't approached her.
And I guess it certainly wouldn't be out of the question. That seems like a tall task. And I guess we are open to talking about anything. And I would leave it just like that. That by no means means that we're ready to pick the house up and move it or whatever it may be. But there's nothing wrong with conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your openness and willingness to talk about all these things. Eric, I don't know if we have anything more on this.
Okay. Okay, so as promised at the beginning, quick look at what comes after this meeting. So we got some great feedback this evening. We really appreciate it. This all is going to be incorporated into our report and into potential changes to the alternatives based on what we heard. So we go forward and evaluate the alternatives and make changes as necessary. Through that analysis, we will determine a preferred alternative based on sort of what we heard tonight and what the project committee comes up with. And once that's done, we will seek select board endorsement of the preferred alternative, well, in this case, alternatives. And then the report gets finalized. And if we do come out with the preferred alternative for one or all of these segments, then we'd be sort of right in line for that grant season in April and May, where these projects could be put forward for state funding. So that's what we have for tonight. There is a project website. You can get to it from the CRPC's website. And we've got emails for myself and for Jason, and we are happy to take comments or feedback outside of this meeting. If anybody thinks of something after this ends, we'd love to hear feedback. It can go through the town of Richmond as well, right through Revy.
I'll just add that we don't have tonight's presentation up on the project website yet, but if you give us a couple of days, we'll get that up there. And then in the case of the preferred alternatives, just something to keep in mind that even, if an alternative is selected, it doesn't mean it's going to look, exactly like that. There's still, modifications that could be made if a path needs to be narrowed, or if you want to, avoid a tree in a certain spot. There's still plenty of time to work out finer details.
Right. And one other thing is that even having a preferred alternative doesn't commit the town to anything. It's there for if the town wants to go forward. It helps out with the grant scoring for the VTrans, bike ped, and transportation alternative grants, but it doesn't commit the town to anything.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and enjoy your evenings.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.